Have you ever been accused of not giving your all in a relationship? Let's talk about spouses. You ever been accused of not giving enough where the spouse would be like, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm giving this and you're not living up to your part, or basically what they're saying is you're not living up to their expectations. Have you ever been accused of that? Or maybe you're in a relationship now, maybe you were in a relationship in the past where you were accused of that. Well, I have been accused of that on more than one occasion. And so I was reflecting on myself. And I had a conversation with my daughter yesterday, and I was reminded of my childhood in that it had a lot to do, it had a lot to do with, how I am today. And so one of the things that I know people don't understand about me is that they think I am, well, I've been told I was stoic. They don't understand the background. And I've been misunderstood a lot in my life because people don't understand the background. Maybe you've been misunderstood as well because people don't understand your background. They don't understand where you've been, what you've been through, what God has brought you from. They don't understand your background. And so as a result, what they're seeing is misunderstood. Now, that is not to say that we get to be wrong, do wrong, and all that stuff to people because of what has happened in our background. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that our background, our history, for some of us, it's maybe laden with trauma. For some of us, you may not have even dealt with trauma. For some of us, you may have a little bit of trauma. Our backgrounds are different. However, it's still relevant to who and how we are today, right? And so I'm not saying that we are to justify a behavior that is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that it's a part of, or it has shaped who we are today. The traumas or rejection or abandonment, all of that also can be labeled as traumas. So I'm not saying that those things can't change. I believe in a God that can do the impossible. Granted, absolutely. And he has consistently been changing me into this new creation that he's called me to be. So I believe that will happen for others as well. But what I'm also saying is that the traumas that we have endured, I don't want to call us damaged goods, but you'll hear people say that all the time, that we are damaged goods. I don't want to say that. What I want to say is that we got some stuff that comes with us, and it affects us in our relationships with our spouses. Let's just say it like that. And so as a result, I'm really picking my words here, guys. As a result, we get involved in these relationships and these marriages. And again, we're not really mindful of the background of our spouses, or maybe we are at one time, but then again, we forget. And then because of our expectations, we get frustrated. I mean, it happens. We need to always check our expectations. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? Why, etc. Right? I do that. I've learned to do that. But I think a big issue that I find, and I'm going to keep it on me, that I find is that acceptance isn't always given. Acceptance isn't always given. So what happens in those scenarios, when acceptance of where that person is or where each other is in their process of being recreated in Christ, if the acceptance is not there, then our feelings get in the way. Our feelings, our frustrations, our issues of, oh, I don't feel like I'm getting enough from you. But here's the thing. Since we're both coming into a relationship, a marriage, a union, since two people are coming together like that, and you're both bringing this baggage, as some people say, or you're bringing these traumas, you're bringing these backgrounds together, there's going to be some form of discomfort that you're going to experience. And if you don't know how to work through that discomfort, then you're going to end up with some serious issues in the relationship. So I was talking to my daughter yesterday, like I mentioned earlier, and she knows me very well. She knows me, and I thank God for her because she has gotten to a place where she can accept me where I am and how I am. And I thank God for that, because that wasn't always the case. But here's the thing. And also accepting me, she has also learned to appreciate how I am and who I am, right? So I thank God for that, because, again, that's not always something that people in relationships do. Or I can say it might take time to do. And that really depends on if the person even wants to get to that place of accepting you or understanding you. That just depends. I personally do not enter into a relationship with the mindset that, oh, I want this person, well, let me say, I enter into the relationship with someone, whether it's a friendship or not, where I don't have the expectation that the person is going to be understand me or anything like that, but I don't have that expectation, but it would be nice. I just will be in relationship with someone simply because, they get me right off the bat, or they accept me right off the bat, or it's not something that it's a thought process for me. It's just something that happens, in our get-togethers, in our interaction with each other. So that's something that just happens. It's not something, and when that happens, then you're comfortable around that person to the point where you're like, oh, okay, I can do this. I like this. This feels okay to me. As opposed to if you get around people and you don't get that, and it will be very obvious to you. You don't get that, then you're not in relationship with that person. That's just like a no-brainer, right? So in talking to my daughter, she was telling me about myself, and she was right in her analysis of me. And I appreciated that very much. I probably should tell her that, but I appreciated that very much, because you don't get that very often. And so in our conversation, I told her that I've been doing some thinking myself. And so I went all the way back as far as I could to the various losses that I've had in my life, as far as when my husband died, when my son died, my dad died, my mom died, a friend died, that kind of thing. So I went back to try to see what my response is, because I'll say this, my present husband, he doesn't always get me. I find that he has moments where he does, or periods where he does, and then I think at times he just doesn't. And so I went all the way back to try to see what my response was during different types of losses in my life. Was I the same? Did I give the same response? Was I emotional? How was I? And in talking to my daughter yesterday, I said, I have been consistent in my responses. It's not to say that I'm unfeeling. It's not to say that I don't have emotions. It's just the way I handle it. I do grieve. I do cry. I feel all those things, but I don't necessarily show it in the way that people think I should. And people misunderstand that. I've had that so many times. They misunderstand that as, oh, I don't care, or I'm unfeeling, or whatever the case may be. I get that. But my actions show otherwise. So my actions towards people, whether I'm feeling the emotions that they think I should feel or not, my actions should still say love, because the Bible says that we're not to love in word, but to love in deed and in truth. And deed are actions. Deeds are the things that we do. And so for people who do have relationship with me, people who do know me, they experience love in the things that I do for them, in the things that I do around them, the things that they witness me do to other people around them, etc. And so, I thank God for that. And in thinking this morning, I'm still processing the conversation I had with my daughter yesterday. I was just continuing with this thought process about myself, and I've had trauma at a very young age, where I was molested, and that trauma, even though the Lord has delivered me from it, and I thank God for that, He delivered me from that about 7 years ago. The trauma that I experienced from that and growing up put me in protection mode of self, right? And so I recognize that now. So there are traumas that we experience that will put us in different modes. Like for some people, you go into protection mode. And some people, they go into this needy mode where they're clingy, right? And then you have, this is not all inclusive. This is just some of the things that I've realized in my own life. And then some people, they have this this indifference, right? That they have towards life, towards people, towards situations, right? And so I can see where some people looking at me and the way I deal with trauma or loss and stuff like that would say that I was indifferent. I can see that. But what they don't see, and again, is the background, or what they don't know, for those of them who don't know me well enough, is that I'm going to take everything to the Lord in prayer. That is what I seek to do on a regular basis. I take things to the Lord in prayer, and I give it to the Lord because I can't handle things on my own. I am aware of this. I don't want to lean on my own understanding. And so I go to the Lord in prayer. That is what I strive to do every time. So in me going to the Lord in prayer, what they don't see is when I'm on my knees crying out to the Lord. They don't see, the heartbreak when I'm before the Lord. That they don't see all that. They want to see that because they want to say, oh, well, maybe she does have a heart. Maybe she does have feelings. That's what people want to see. And if this is you, then you can relate. They want to see that, but what they're actually seeing is God being my strength in my weakness. And one example comes to mind when my son had passed away, and the day of the funeral, they had a viewing before. And so, certain people were allowed to come in because it wasn't open to everyone, but people were able to come in and go view him in his casket. What people saw that day, and I'll never forget, I heard people say, oh, she's faking it, or oh, she's putting on a front. I heard that behind my back. And I smiled, even though what they said bothered me initially. It bothered me, and I was like, wait, hold up. That kind of thing. But I smiled because in that moment when I heard it, I recognized and I gave God glory, because it was only because of God that I was able to get through that day. It was amazing how God can take over. The Holy Spirit took over, and he's done that time and time again in various situations where he's taken over. You know, in those moments when people see me and I'm being strong, you know, that's when God is taking over. When people have come to me after the fact, when, you know, I've gone back to work after my husband passed away, or went back to work after my son passed away, or I'm, you know, going to church, or I'm dealing with life after loss in a way where they're amazed, or they say things to me like, how are you doing this? You know, my response is God. And for some people, I've actually asked them, I said, are you praying for me? And they'll say, yeah. And I'm like, what are you praying for? And they're like, I'm praying that God will strengthen you, that God will be your comfort. And then I look at them like, well, that's what he's doing. He's answering your prayers. So in my mind, I'm thinking that people pray not really believing that God is going to answer, or they pray not understanding or expecting God to answer in the way that they prayed. And that blows me away. That blows me away time and time again. And so when you see someone, instead of judging, maybe consider their background, or maybe consider, you know, what God is doing in that moment. And so people, when they tell me that I'm strong, I always tell people, I said, you know what? I'm only as strong as the God that's in me. And that is the honest to God truth, because if it wasn't for God, in any of those scenarios where I had lost a loved one, I truly believe that I would be in a mental institution somewhere, because it's loss, you know. And for those of you who don't have God or have not relied on God in this way, can probably relate to being devastated by the loss, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so anyway, so I'm dealing with all of that narrative and thoughts and mindset this morning and yesterday and lately, just pondering and thinking and talking to the Lord about myself and how I deal with things and how people see me and why people might say the things they do. And just in talking to my daughter again yesterday, one of the things I mentioned to her that God brought back to my mind was that he let me know that how I am and the way I deal with things, which again can be standoffish or whatever people might want to call it, it has a lot to do with the trauma that I experienced as a child. And what he let me know is that I went into protection mode around the age of 7 or 8, because that is the time in my life when my mom took us to Trinidad to go live with a friend of hers. And for me, that was devastating, even though I didn't recognize it until much later in life. And in sharing that with my daughter yesterday, she's like, I'm really glad that God revealed that to you, because I recognize that in you. And what happened in the lives of my children is that when they got to the same age, around 7 or 8, I backed off from this nurturing part of me, so that they now could learn to fend for themselves in case anything happened to them. I didn't do it consciously, but the Lord let me know that I did do that. And so my daughter recognized that after her, you know, evaluating and processing and stuff. She also recognized that later. But I thank God that she had her grandmother, who served like a second mom to her. This was her grandmother on her father's side, who was there and could nurture her and do the things that I was unable to do for her post that age. So I'm just glad we had that conversation yesterday, and that I'm able to share with her, and she's able to talk to me about, you know, how she's felt and stuff like that. So all of that was happening within yesterday, today, and recently. And it got me into thinking about how in marriage, when two people come together that have dealt with trauma or not dealt with trauma correctly, how when you come together, how, and for lack of a better term, I want to say damaged. And so they come together as these two damaged people, hurt people, and they're trying to unite as one. However, their responses to the trauma that they have endured may be different. And if one's mode of response is to protect and the other's mode response is to be clingy, can you see how that could be a problem? You have one who wants to protect and the other one who wants to cling, but the one who wants to protect is always backing up while the one who wants to cling is always trying to get closer to that person. And so it's kind of like when you put the magnet on the two opposite sides and you try to put them together and they keep going back like this because you can't put them together. It's kind of like that, right? So you have these two people that are together, coming together in this relationship, and you're trying to come together as one, and you can't because of the different ways in which the trauma has affected you. And yet you still have these expectations of each other that they're going to give you what you need. Imagine that. And so now you're frustrated because you're thinking, well, you're supposed to be able to give me what I need because you're my spouse, without recognizing and realizing that that person can't give you what you need because of what they've dealt with, because of their background. So imagine that. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that we fail to do when we start getting angry because that person is not meeting our need. We fail to see that in that person's, what do I want to say? I want to say where that person is in their process, wherever God is bringing them from and taking them through, wherever that person is in their process, we fail to see the limitations of our spouse. So let's just say, God is bringing your spouse through, through whatever they've been through, because he's working on molding us and reshaping us. And, God has the ability and the power to fix all our damaged places and amend all our broken places and heal all the things that have happened to us. He can do that, and he will do that. However, we fail to recognize what the other person, the other spouse, is dealing with and how they're dealing with it. And we don't accept them where they are, because in our minds, we want what we want. We want more. We expect more, but we don't process the fact that maybe your spouse is giving you everything that they can where they are. Your spouse could be giving you, in your mind, they're only giving you 20%. They're only giving you 10%. You might think they're only giving you 30%, and you're giving all the rest. And you're thinking, well, I'm giving all of this. Why can't you give me back what I'm giving you in return? And we're failing to understand that that person, your spouse, could very well be giving you 100% of their 30%, of their 10%, of their 20%. And they're giving you everything that they have right there and now in their process. But you're not accepting that. You're not appreciating that. You're getting frustrated with them because you're not appreciating them where they are. And it happens. And then frustration sets in and resentment sets in, and you feel rejected and you feel like you're being abandoned and you feel like your spouse doesn't care. But what we're failing to recognize is that that person is giving you all that they have, if that's what they're doing. I mean, there are people who won't give you all that they have, but let's just say that you have a spouse that is giving you 100% of their 20, 100% of their 10. Here's the thing that we fail to recognize. And this is when we go outside the marriage. This is what leaves us open to other people now coming in and doing for us what that spouse is not doing that you want them to do. Ouch, right? So here's the thing that the Lord was showing me and dealing with me. So we want what we want. That's just, the flesh just wants what it wants. It wants what it wants, and it wants it now. It wants to be satiated. It wants to be, I think that's the right word. It wants to be pleased, and it wants it now. So what happens when we don't get what we want, that's prime opportunity for the devil to now bring in a distraction. So bring in someone who is doing exactly what it is we want that we're not getting from our spouse. Many years ago, David said to me, "Why do you think people cheat?" And I said, people cheat because they're not getting what they want. That was about maybe 10 years ago. My thought process is still the same. People cheat because they're not getting what they want. And let me explain. So that spouse that you believe is only giving you 20%, that's what you feel. Or let's just say you recognize that they're giving you 20%, and you recognize that they're giving you all of that 20%, which is 100% of where they are. Let's say you even understand that concept, but you still want what you want, and you're not getting it from that spouse. So in comes someone who you recognize now is doing exactly or saying exactly or giving you exactly what it is your spouse is not giving you. So maybe they're attentive where your spouse is not. Maybe they're compassionate where your spouse is not. Maybe they're a good listener where your spouse is not. Maybe they're more understanding where your spouse is not. Whatever the case may be, they're now filling that void that your spouse is not able to give you because of where they are in their process. So before you know it, you're more drawn to this person that's outside the marriage because they're giving you what you're not getting in your marriage. That's a no-brainer, because again, you're lacking that in your relationship, and it's something that you really desire. So that's how people are drawn out of the marriage and end up cheating. Now, cheating doesn't have to be sexual. It could be that you give your heart to this person. It could be that you're spending time with this person and you're lusting, and not even lusting sexually, but you're lusting for the attention of this person, or you're lusting for the intellect of this person, or you're lusting for the time that this person gives you. Whatever the case may be, that's cheating because you're outside of your marriage, your spouse, right? So I'm processing this with the Lord, and what the Lord is letting me know is that this all goes back to our expectations. But what it also does, and this is why I'm thinking on the lines of Christians and why they cheat. And why is there even a difference between whether you're Christian or not? Well, there's a difference because we know better. I mean, we know better when we're not Christians, but we know better in the sense that we want to please God, right? That part is what I'm talking about, and as opposed to our flesh, right? That's where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to trying to be obedient to God, right? That's what I'm talking about when I bring in the Christianity part of it. But here's the thing. When we have this expectation of our spouses and we don't get what we expect, we start hardening our heart because we start feeling resentful. We start feeling betrayal. We start feeling unappreciated, et cetera, right? We get caught up in our feelings. And that's a huge part of the problem. What we do when we get caught up in our feelings is we fail to recognize that our spouses are more than this thing or this need that we want fulfilled. If we took the time to analyze the other percent, so say your spouse is only giving you 20%. If you analyze the other 80% of what your spouse is giving you, is the 20% really that much more important than the 80% of what they're already doing or giving? Sir, think about that. Because if your spouse cannot give you more than the 20% right now where they are in their process, is the 80% worth nothing? And is the 10%, or if they're giving 10, is the 90% worth nothing and worth throwing away so that you can get the 10% from someone else, or so that you can get the 20% from somewhere else, or the 30% or whatever it is from someone else? So here's the thing the Lord had let me know, is that if that spouse of yours is incapable where they are, or maybe they will never be able to, I don't know. But if they're incapable of giving you that 20%, 10%, 30%, or whatever it is, that need, fulfilling that need that you need fulfilled, you need to go to God for that need. God lets us know in the Bible, he says that God, Paul says that God will provide all our needs according to his riches and glory. Now, that's not just about money or food or clothing. That also goes along with the things that we need in our spouses. And now you might, or some people might be like, nah, I don't believe that. Oh, that's fine. You might have an opinion that's different than mine, and that's great. I'm only going to bring you what the Lord has shown me. So if your spouse is incapable, again, I'm saying it again, is incapable of giving you what it is that you need, then you need to go to the Lord. And I say that because the Lord has let me know, because there was a time when I was so caught up in a man, so caught up, and I was saved at the time, and he was my husband, and I was trying to balance, my heart between my husband and God, and it was impossible. And it wasn't until much later that the Lord let me know, he's like, it's not a balancing act that you need to do when it comes to your spouse and me. It's about perspective. And the perspective is who am I? God is saying to me, who am I? As opposed to who your spouse is, and so God, there's no balance there. There's no comparison, right? God is God. He says to love him with all of our hearts, with all of our minds, with all of our soul, with all of our strength, all of our hearts. And I had to go to God with that one. I'm like, God, how am I to love you with all of my heart and still be able to love others as well with my heart? And the thing is, and I think we get this wrong, God is not calling us to love people with our heart. He's calling us to love people in deed and in truth. He's calling us to love him with all of our hearts, all of it. And I was like, well, Lord, really? Because when we think of loving with all of our heart, we're thinking about emotions, and we're thinking about feelings, and we're thinking about, stuff like that. And he let me know again, he says, love is not in word, but love is in deed and in truth. So it doesn't mean that we don't have feelings for those that we love, but they don't get our hearts. And for me, and I've come to this understanding, and accept it. I know for me, I have always been a one woman man. Oh gosh, that sounds bad. A one man woman. Does that even sound right too? Anyway, let me say it this way. I cannot be involved with two men at the same time. So for me to cheat on my husband, if I'm in a relationship with my husband as opposed to not, where I'm living with my husband, we're living together, we're working things out, whatever, as opposed to, oh, I'm separated and I no longer live with my husband. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if I'm living in the same house with my husband, or if I was in a relationship with a boyfriend, or, whatever the case may be, I cannot mix with two people at the same time. I couldn't give my heart, my attention, and my all to two people at the same time. So for me, the same applies now when it comes to God. When I gave God my whole heart, when I finally figured out that I was to do that and what that was, it's difficult now for my husband to understand, how I am the way that I am in relationship with him. So I'm still, and I'm telling on myself right now, this is transparency. I'm still not this emotional person, because that's just the way I grew up because of the trauma. So I'm still not that lovey-dovey, emotional, goo-goo gaga type person. I'm not that person. Will God ever change that? Can he? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm just wired this way. And again, will God change that? Hopefully, if that's what he takes. But in the meantime, if he doesn't, then, that part, it's just that my husband may want, if that's the case, and if that's the case that your husband may want, or your wife may want, if that's not you, if that's not in you, because you can't give something that's not in you, but if that's not in you, then your spouse should accept that and should take that need that they have, that particular need, what I'm referring to right now, to the Lord in prayer. The Lord let me know, he says that for me, I get consumed with the person that I'm involved in. I used to get consumed in the man that I was involved in. So I got consumed to the place where God's position in my life, again, I was trying to balance, because I was so busy consumed with this person that there was no room for God. So God knows that about me. And so he knows that I am able to give my heart in that way and be consumed. But he also knows that if I do that with a man, where he will then be, right? So God knows us. He knows what it takes to get us to love him right. He knows what it takes for us to be in right relationship with him. And so he let me know a long time ago that if a man, or if a woman, so if your spouse was able to give you everything that you needed, we would never need God. Think about it. If your spouse could give you that stuff that you are lacking, that you still want so desperately and you need, and let's just say that they were able to give you that, would you be going to God on your knees? Would you be drawn to God? Would you need God? Just think about it. So he's saying to me that those people, Christians, who cheat within their marriage and they go outside the marriage and they're drawn to people who represent the things that they're lacking in their marriage with their spouses. The reason they're going outside the marriage is because they didn't go to God for that need. They didn't go to God concerning that need. And if God can supply all of our needs, then he's the one that we should be going to, right? Think about it. That's deep. We might not want that because, God can't give me sex if that's the case, right? If that's what the need is. No, he can't. But God is still the one that we're supposed to go to. Well, God can't give me, or let's say you long for romance in your marriage. God can't give you, in your relationship with God, he can't come down in the sense that he is, how do I say this? I want to say it right, God. So he's not going to come down and be that person that will give you the romance that you're looking for. But can he do that in your spouse? Can he bring that about in your spouse? Of course he can. But if he doesn't do it, does that mean that you go outside and get it? No, you just have to be at the place where you're like, okay, God, if you haven't done this, and if I can't get this from my spouse, then I have to be at a place where I can accept that and be okay with it. And there might be people listening to this who will disagree, and that's fine. That's your prerogative. But I know what God has done for me, and I know what he's shared with me. And I can only speak from experience. I'm not an expert. And I will tell anyone that. I'm not an expert. I'm only speaking from experience. And I know what God has said to me. And God has said to me that we need to bring those needs to him in prayer. And even if the result of the prayer is not what we expect, we still need to be accepting of our spouses where they're at. We still need to appreciate our spouses for all the other things that they're able to do, as opposed to the things that they're unable to do for us. Right? So another thing that he brought to mind is that, so let's say you have this person who is meeting that need that your spouse is not. Here's what happens, and I know this from experience in the past. You meet someone and they're giving you, or they're doing for you, what you want your spouse to do for you. Or you find out, because sometimes you don't even realize what it is that you are lacking until it shows up in your face. And you're like, oh, wait, that's what I was missing all this time. So what happens is that person, because this is what the devil does, that person will do what it is your spouse is not doing. And for a while, you are caught up in that thing that that person is doing for you. Eventually, you're going to get to that place where what they're doing for you is not enough. And when you get to that place, you recognize, well, wait a minute, what about the rest of what I need? And you start to recognize, wait a minute, this person was really only good for this need. And you're like, whoa, but my wife or my husband was doing all this other stuff, right? They were doing all this other stuff. They brought all this other stuff to the table, and all you're really bringing to the table is this much. And yeah, it's fulfilling a need that my spouse wasn't fulfilling, but is it really worth this much as opposed to what my spouse was giving? And I found that to be really powerful. And so when we look at, when we look at the greater picture, as opposed to the little bit that our spouses are not able to give us or not giving us, what really is of more value? And it's something that we need to think about and process before we start doing some stuff that we regret, before we start saying some stuff that we regret, before we start separating or breaking up or divorcing because of the little bit that we couldn't get. It's something to think about. And in doing so, I believe that we will learn to appreciate our spouses or each other in a different way. Because you know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter where we go or who we turn to in regards to mankind. They're never going to be able to give us everything that we need. God didn't design it that way on purpose. Because if mankind could give us everything that we need, again, we would not need God. So we have to be mindful of what we have, because it's very easy for the devil to come at us with the things that we don't have, with the things that we want, and tempt us with those things that we want that we don't have, if we're not mindful of what we have. Wow, that was a twister. So we need to step back and recognize, or take inventory, I want to say, of what we have in each other, what we have in our spouses. We don't often do that. Why don't we do that? Why would we take inventory of what they aren't doing right? We take inventory of all the things that they've done to us that was wrong. We take inventory of that, right? But how about if we take inventory of what they bring to the table, what they do, what they're able to do, what God has done in them, through them, for them, how he's used them in your life, whatever the case may be. Because God has your spouse there for a reason. He has your spouse there for a reason. And he knows that they're not perfect, and they're like that for a reason. However, just because they're not perfect doesn't mean that he's not still working on them. It doesn't give them the right to do things. And I'm not saying that they do things to be spiteful. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that, or I'm not saying that it's a reason for them to act a certain way. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is that we need to start looking at our spouses through the lens of, you're not perfect. God is not through with you yet. You're being perfected in Christ, etc. Look at it through that lens, because the lens is also the lens that they should be looking at you through, in that you're not perfect either. God is still working on you. You still have some issues, etc., etc., etc. So what I'm really saying is that stop pointing the finger at your spouse for the things that they're not doing, because guess what? You're not doing what you're supposed to do either. So whether you're doing 20% more than they're doing, or you're doing 50% more than they're doing, whatever the case may be, you're still not doing 100%. And I'm not saying 100% of your 50%. I'm saying 100% of the whole. In that people believe that when you come together, it should be 50-50, or, people believe, whatever the case may be. I'm saying that neither one of us in the marriage is perfect. And so neither one of us have the right to point a finger at the other person. We have to change the way we look at each other, so that we can now change the way we blend together, the way we live together, the way we move forward together. Because we can't move together unless we're in agreement that we're moving together. If you're moving outside of us being together, then you're moving alone. The Bible says, how can two walk together unless they agree? So how about we just learn to agree to look at each other through the perspective, or the lens that God looks at us through, in that we are becoming new creations in Christ Jesus. And so in us becoming new creations in Christ Jesus, we know that the process is not over, and therefore cut each other some slack and recognize that your spouse was not there to meet all your needs, because if they did, you wouldn't need God. So cut your spouse some slack and go to God.